Valheim and castles are a perfect match. And that is why today I am building castles for all 7 Valheim biomes currently in the game. We're talking fresh designs, new ideas, and months of building and planning, all compressed into one video for your enjoyment. I'll take you through my process behind each project, but you gotta promise that you'll comment your favorite build down below. As always, this build file will be made available for download on the Smitty Survival Patreon page, and a huge thank you to those who continue to support the content. Hope you all enjoy, and without further ado, grab a snack, grab a drink, and let's get right into it. Meadows. Vibrant, peaceful, and in my opinion, the heart of the Valheim build world. Taking on the task of building castles in every biome is something that is a bit intimidating at first. Nevertheless, it's important to work on different creative muscles, and my castle building skills definitely needed some work. For this Meadows castle, I decided to keep it more humbly designed, utilizing a lot of rough stone and wood, and limiting its footprint, but wanted to fit in with the more classic feel of the Meadows. One thing that I actually really like about this castle is how the various segments of the castle aren't all parallel or perpendicular to each other. It makes things a little bit more tricky to get all the different segments to blend, but it does make the overall composition look a little more interesting, even if it's not that big. Moving to the back, I built a balcony that would overlook the river and coastline, before moving back to the front and making the decision to build a wall around my keep. Using the wooden palisades on top of the stone is a design that I've used in a couple other builds, but I think it's just a great combination for a wall that looks a little more crude and primitive. With the structural pieces done, it was time to work on the interiors. Again, not a huge keep, and nothing too flashy here, but wanted to make sure it felt lived in. So I took some time to flesh out a throne room, kitchen, and then some bedrooms. Finally, as some last touches, I took some time to work on the landscape around the castle, and just added some fences here, a couple trees, and just made the whole scene really come together. With that, my Meadows castle was complete. We'll call this castle Hearthglen Hold. A modest castle set in the rolling hills of the Meadows. Its cozy halls were a perfect spot for a humble lord to spend his days in peace. Entering into the Black Forest, it was time to step it up. Meadows served as a good warm-up, but now the challenge is to create something with a bit of a different feel to it. Selecting the right location is always important, but terraforming is also an incredibly powerful tool that should never be ignored. In this case, I wanted to highlight the hill even more by digging out a massive trench around it to stage the castle in a more dramatic way. Additionally, I had the idea that the only way to enter this castle was going to be over a bridge that spanned across the trench. A singular choke point that would be easy to control and defend. After working on the entrance, I plotted out the footprint of the castle, noting where I thought different sections of the building could go. I wanted this main tower to have a bit of randomness to it. You'll notice that it's not totally balanced or symmetrical, which I like. Kinda feels like it has some history to it. Like it had continually been built up, destroyed, and repaired in different segments over the years, leading to an unbalanced look. Whereas my Meadows build utilized more boxy structures, I wanted to introduce some new shapes and curves to this building. Working with curves is always a little bit tricky, but it gives a nice flow and different composition that makes, I think, builds look a lot more interesting. Moving on to the interiors, I had in mind a tentative story that this castle was occupied by a clan of rangers. Keeping that theme in mind, I started out by building a small makeshift archery range where they could practice with their bows. In the back courtyard, I thought it'd be really cool to bring a sense of nature inside the walls, so I built out a garden with a well where perhaps the rangers studied herbs or maybe fostered their connections with nature through deep meditation. I moved further on into the interiors where I built out some sleeping quarters, a centralized fireplace, and then set aside some beds and spaces where the rangers would rest. I then moved on to the main tower, where I really liked the idea to have a round table here, and brought in different vines to the building because I thought it'd be a fun fantasy element for the room, and fitting for a forest castle. I had to add some final touches, and the Black Forest Castle was complete. This stronghold would be called Caer Lethwyn, home to a line of noble rangers who long protected these forests. Unmatched with a bow and experts at camouflage and tracking, though their numbers have dwindled in recent years, the Caer Lethwyn Rangers remain steadfast in their commitments to defend these woods from beast and foe alike. Now it was time to head into the swamp. Thematically a much darker biome, I wanted to build a castle that felt in line with that tone. I started by terraforming a small island that would serve as the foundation, before moving on to plotting out a general outline of the structure with stone. This castle wasn't going to be huge, but wanted it to have a kind of stocky feel to it. I had a vision for a curved stairway that led up to the keep, and then some circular capped towers that were positioned around it. When building, it's always important to stay disciplined with your themes. For instance, you'll notice that although my towers aren't completely identical, they still express similar patterns and styles and colors. They feel like they're part of the same build. Not that you always need to build in this way, but it's definitely my personal preference, so I think it helps make the build feel a little more cohesive and have a clear story to it. I dressed up the walls with some decorations and then added some burger steak walls on the outside. It worked actually quite well due to their more random and worn look. The dark metal accents at the top of them also paired nicely with the overall darker theme of the build. As the castle came together, I had a choice to make on the story of this build. Do I make it a lively swamp stronghold that is currently being defended? Or do I go for a more abandoned feel that is consistent with the other ruins in the swamp? I decided to go for something in the middle. I thought, what if this castle, although eroding away and abandoned by its original occupants, now used as a camp by various adventurers and grave robbers looking to plunder the surrounding crypts? The rest of the interiors would just be an exercise in making the build feel more broken down and really communicate that story that this place has really just eroded away over the years into the swamp. Just a couple last touches, and my swamp castle would be complete. I'll call this place Dreadmire Keep. Found deep within an eerie mire cursed with an everlasting rain, it was a somber sight as it slowly eroded into the dark waters. Long abandoned, it had only recently been occupied by daring grave robbers looking to plunder the surrounding crypts. Headed into the mountains, I wanted my next castle to have a very different style from the rest, and lead into more dwarven themes. I started with shaving off a good chunk of the top of the mountain, so that I'd have a decent platform to build from, and then added back rocks around the crown to make it a little more natural and blended with the environment. After getting the general outline for my base structure, I started experimenting with some different styles. This was a bit tricky because, unlike my other castles which felt a little more classic, I wanted this project to have a more fantasy flair and feel distinctly dwarven. It took me some time to figure out some patterns and designs I liked, but eventually I think I found a really solid style utilizing a combination of the Grosslin pieces and stone. Working my way through the approach, I was trying to figure out how exactly I wanted to wrap the entrance around. I thought it'd be cool if the build looped underneath itself before wrapping around, so I bridged across the gap and then built this up as the main gate. Sticking to the stocky dwarven look, I began to build out the rest of the stronghold, doing my best to accent the project with pillars and arches where appropriate, and fill out the rest of this mountain. For this project, I kind of felt like I fell into the trap of scope creep, where I just kept adding more and more to the structure. I really like the style, and it's easy to keep convincing yourself to keep adding another tower here, adding another structure there. But eventually you do just gotta call it quits and say it's done. I thought it'd be cool if the path leading up to the castle kind of spiraled up the mountain. So I spawned in some rocks to create a ramp that led up to the gate. With that, the structure of the castle was complete. Although the build ended up a little bigger than I originally anticipated, I think it looked really epic sitting on top of this mountain, and had a really distinct style to it that heightened that fantasy feel. Moving on to the interiors, it was nice to bring some warmth to an otherwise very cold structure. I worked through some various rooms, adding thrones, sleeping quarters, and other common spaces for the garrison that occupied the stronghold. My final task was to convert one of these last open spaces into a forge, as I imagined those who lived in the mountains would have been skilled miners and blacksmiths, utilizing the rare materials found on the mountains to craft gear of the highest quality. The keep of Carak was perched high on a peak overlooking the snowy slopes. It was garrisoned by a hardy group of mountaineer warriors known as the Frostbeard Sentinels, who were uniquely skilled at navigating these icy landscapes. They regularly launched expeditions deep into mountain caverns, as they were entrusted with defending critical mountain passes, but Carak served as a bastion of defense in an otherwise treacherous mountain. Plains. Rolling golden hills may trick the less experienced adventurer into thinking that this is a peaceful place for a quaint homestead. However, this is a ruthless biome. My thought for the castle here was to build something on a hill with good visibility all around. Whereas my other builds had a little more randomness to their composition, I thought I'd go with a more symmetrical design for the Plains castle, seeing as it would need to be defensible from all approaches. Once I had my general shapes, I could then start expressing out more details by layering in stone, bring in some contrast, and add some depth to make it look less flat. You'll see in most of my builds, I end up working on multiple layers, which allows me to add a little more depth and detail to the build. This concept is called relief, which refers to adding depth to surfaces by adding patterns that are raised above or sometimes sunken into flat surfaces. The top of the castle would be capped with an A-frame wooden structure, but then I also had the surrounding walls decorated to feel as defensive as possible. When choosing this location, I noticed that there was some water showing through the ground in a sunken area next to the hill. This gave me an idea. The traces of water meant that if I dug deep enough, I could actually create a small lake around my keep. This would end up being a huge terraforming project, but I thought it'd be a really unique and cool way to frame this build. I took some time to dig out the lake, and then did my best to ensure it looked as natural as possible, getting rid of sharp edges and adding other natural elements like rocks and sunken trees to blend into the world. I even added a couple fish to inhabit the newly formed lake. I then moved on to the bridge that would connect each shoreline. I worked out some different designs and initially had it leading into another layer of gates on the far side of the bridge, but ultimately decided to break down the gate as it felt just a little too crowded with the bridge. Just took some time to clean up a couple other areas in the entrance, and the structure was complete. The lake was definitely a bold decision, but it was really a unique opportunity that I couldn't pass up on. Now it was just time to work on the interiors. With the increased size of the structure, I had a little bit more room to actually build a proper throne room. I designed some ornate pillars leading up to the throne, then hung some banners across the adornments, which gave the approach a much more grand feeling. For the rest of the interiors, I just took some time to design out some areas that I think would be necessary for the castle. Places like a storeroom, a small armory, small cantina and kitchen, and then added some bedrooms. And with that, my Plains Castle was complete. I'll call this one Valskjaldur Keep, roughly translating into Shield of the Plains in Old Norse. During the Fueling Wars, which have lasted over the last century, this stronghold has never fallen and has served as a safe refuge for the local farmers, as well as tradesmen traveling through the region. Next, it was time to venture into the Mistlands. Marked by rocky spires jutting out from a veil of mist, it's definitely one of the most unique areas in the game. I don't often build here, but it's such a dramatic landscape, it really does provide an opportunity for some really cool projects. For the castle in this biome, I thought it would be interesting to try to build one right off the coast. The Mistlands have a bit of a dark and mysterious feel to it, I wanted the castle to carry that same vibe. After plotting out the foundation of the structure, I started building out the first tower. Being in the Mistlands, I naturally chose to work with the black marble pieces, but I tried to mix in some other lighter color materials as well just to create more contrast and prevent the structure from blending into itself too much. After finishing the first tower, I decided to build out a larger round tower, making sure to keep consistent with the same style. This would likely be the largest structure of the build, and so in my head, I tentatively planned that this would be where the feast hall and throne room would be. Moving to the back, I developed the rest of the area that I had plotted out, raising up and enclosing the structure with some new segments that I thought would likely be made into some kind of sleeping quarters, then added a gate to the back of the castle. I then noticed that I had a nice little island right offshore. This sat in the middle of the bay, so I thought it'd be an interesting idea to build another tower here and have it connected by some kind of catwalk or bridge over the water. I built up the tower, making sure to keep consistent with my previous designs, and decided to make the bridge connect from the midpoint of the tower so that small ships could still sail underneath. Moving to the other side of the castle, I continued with the boardwalk idea and brought it down to the channel beside the keep. I built out a small dock and spawned in a large ship, before ultimately building out and connecting the walkway to the other side of my castle. I had a nice little island sitting out in front of my gate. Gave me another opportunity to implement one of my curved bridge designs. It's always a little bit tricky getting the exact shape I want, but With a little bit of patience and a couple of reworks, I got the smooth curve that I was looking for. I then started developing the remainder of this front island. I began building out some different pathways, but then had the idea of building a statue in the center. It had to be something that symbolized the maritime nature of this place, so I decided to go with a giant anchor. I was able to outline a simple shape with the ash wood pieces, and it actually turned out pretty well. It served as a nice focal point for this island. I had a couple open spots left on the island, and it felt a little light on defenses, so I decided to build out some more towers to overlook this area. Again, I stuck to some similar designs as before, but decided to make one of them slightly smaller than the other, just to provide a little wrinkle in the repetitiveness of the structures. I added some additional decorations, and with that, the exterior of my castle was complete. I was really loving the direction of this project. The darker tone and winding boardwalks were just a really cool combination for this castle next to the sea. Next, it was time to work on the interiors. I started with the largest building out the throne room where the mariners would gather and feast, a place for some respite after a long journey at sea. I moved on to the adjacent building where I built out their sleeping quarters, living spaces. There wasn't a lot of space, so I utilized a bunk bed design for the beds, and then snuck in a small fireplace and then a small storage space in the corner of the room. And then finally, I moved out to the courtyard, where I built a small forge in the corner where armaments could be crafted and repaired. One last second addition I did make was to add one more tower to the hill behind my castle. I thought that taking advantage of the higher elevation would help add a little more verticality to the project, with a tower that stood clear above the rest in the background. Valemar Outpost. You knew where to find this fortress, and even fewer were skilled enough to survive the treacherous journey through violent seas and rocky coastlines to get there. Shrouded deep within the Mistlands archipelago, only the most hardened of mariners were accepted into the Valemarian crew, who were both revered and feared for their command of the seas. The Ashlands, our final biome. Building in the Ashlands wouldn't naturally be my first choice of places to start a project. Definitely more of a go in, grab what you need, and get out of the zone. But sticking with the challenge of building in every biome, it's not one that I could ignore. I started with outlining the shape of the structure, electing to go with more of a hexagonal layout, with a couple large towers plotted in each of the corners. Naturally, being in the Ashlands, I decided to use a lot of the Groston as the main material in the build. Although the Ashlands may not be a great biome to build in, I will say that the addition of the Groston and other build pieces of this area have been really nice. It's actually very helpful for executing more ornate or even gothic themes in builds. After finishing up my front walls and entrance, I moved on to the rest of the castle. The area behind was going to be the main structure, but I wanted to make sure that it was all connected by walls and wrapped all the way around the build. I blocked in the rest of my towers using a combination of the Groston pillars and arches, walls to add some depth to the siding. Then continued to work around the build, blocking in my walls and in the elongated battlement pattern that was present on all sides of the structure. Moving back to the outside of the castle, I wanted to do something that made this castle feel like it was in a much more defensible position. So I decided to dig out a trench around the exterior of the walls, and then decided to fill that trench with a bunch of the Diverger sharp stakes. At this point, I was really happy with the exteriors of this structure. Definitely had a unique feel to it, and the Grossen pieces just added a lot of detail that I wouldn't otherwise been able to do. I started out with the courtyard, adding my first shield generator in the middle, and then framing some doors that would lead into some more humble and compact sleeping quarters. For my throne room, I again elevated my throne on a platform to make it the focal point of the room, but I also really like the use of the red jute rugs and banners that brought a lot of contrast to an otherwise very gray and monotone look for the Grossen. In the rest of the structure, I just took some time building out a small kitchen. It took some time to create some areas for storing resources. I built out a small forge where weapons and armors would be crafted and repaired. And then finally added some nicer bedrooms towards the top of the structure. With these final touches, my Ashland castle was complete. I called this final refuge Eldskjall, loosely translating to Fire Shell. One of the last remaining strongholds of the Ashlands, it was under constant attack by enemies and monsters alike. However, the warriors of Eldskjall thrived. Fueled by the adrenaline of combat, their appetite for war was the only thing they needed to keep themselves going in this hellscape. So there you have it, castle for each of the currently available Valheim biomes. Let me know your favorite in the comments down below. Hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.